I'm Robert Martinez, State Historian of New Mexico, and this is New Mexico History in 10 minutes. In 1810, the Roman Catholic priest, Father Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla, issued forth his Grito de Dolores, starting the Mexican movement for independence from Spain. 1810. Well, what's going on in New Mexico? Well, let's remember this is about the time that New Mexico is getting ready to send Pedro Bautista Pino to represent New Mexico at the Spanish Cortes at Cadiz in the next year or two. So New Mexico is still very much part of the colonial Mexican system, connecting us to the rest of the greater Spanish Empire. But all that is coming to an end. Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Spain in the early 1800s to try and strangle Portugal, who was helping England. Napoleon wanted to destroy England's economy and control all of Europe. Spain was a stumbling block to that plan. The Spaniards fought back. They were not the world power they used to be. They had a crumbling world empire. And this period where the king was not on the throne gave the colonies a taste of independence. People like Father Hidalgo, they were reading Enlightenment literature. The Inquisition, by the way, forbade that from happening. Forbid or forbade, whatever. It was not legal to read the writings of Rousseau, Locke, Hobbes, Voltaire, all these different ideas that were spreading around the world. Obviously, they were definitely an influence on the American Revolution. People like Jefferson and Adams, Washington, they were reading and being influenced. And later, the French Revolution, they were also influenced by these writings. So the Spanish crown and the Spanish church, they did not want their subjects, their flock, to be influenced by these ideas that were thought to be negative and even evil. Well, there were people reading these things. If you want to know what people were doing, study the laws that of what they were not supposed to be doing, whether they were civil laws or religious laws. That just means people were doing those things that they were not supposed to be doing. So you get this movement starting in Mexico, Nueva España, but it's going to be, pretty soon it's going to be Mexico. And the reason why is that taste of independence really starts to fuel this idea that Mexico can be her own nation, just like the United States. The United States was a big influence, but it wouldn't happen overnight, we'll see. Father Hidalgo's movement started out as a very kind of disorganized movement with a lot of mestizo people, mixed blood. The lower classes were involved. It got somewhat violent. And ultimately what happens is the Spanish government really cracks down on this movement. They hunt down Father Hidalgo and ultimately they execute him. He is executed, and in a really gruesome way, his head is cut off. He's decapitated, and they put his head on a spike, and they put it on display as a warning. The Spanish send a message to the people of Mexico: don't try this again. Well, Father Hidalgo was not able to co-opt the support of the criollo class, or the upper classes, the people who were of primarily European ancestry, which is what he was. He was not very successful in that area. People with names like Iturbide were not ready to get on board, but there was a lot of different aspects at work that would eventually lead to independence, such as the Bourbons of France, they were now in control of the Spanish Empire, and they were very much micromanagers when it came to government and economics. Under the Habsburgs, if you were a miner, you were mining silver or gold in the New World, in the Americas, you had to pay your tax to the king, to the monarch, but it was kind of a loosey-goosey kind of thing. You'd officially report this amount and you'd officially pay this amount of tax, but you might keep a little extra wealth for yourself on the side. Well, the Bourbons started to really crack down on these sorts of things, which led the ruling classes in Mexico to go, this isn't such a great deal. Maybe being in control of our own economic and political destiny will be better than the situation we have now. And having had that taste of independence in Mexico, and then they had it in Peru, and under the Portuguese, of course, Brazil also had a similar situation. It's in this early to mid 1800s period that we really see the Spanish Empire start to crumble. And New Mexico is very much a part of this situation. Independence is coming from Spain for New Mexico as well. We've been part of the Mexican colonial system since 1598. So once independence does arrive, New Mexico will naturally just fall in and become part of the Mexican nation. So we know that there's cracks in the system. Zebulon Pike came to New Mexico in 1807, and this shows that by the early 1800s, New Mexico's fear of the French, which was a big part of the reason for New Mexico to be maintained in the 1700s. Spain wanted to keep New Mexico there as a buffer between New Spain to the south and the French to the east, in places like Louisiana, and the British colonists, and then, of course, the Americans. So there's a lot of political and demographic pressures on the northern region of New Spain, New Mexico. So in New Mexico, what we have are not very many Spaniards, frankly. The priests, there's probably a handful of priests from Spain. Your governors that are sent up here are Spanish. But mainly you have Nuevo Mexicanos up here, and Pueblo and Indios, Genízaro Indians, Apache, Hopi, Navajo peoples. But this idea that independence can ultimately come starts to rise up in New Mexico as well. Now what I want to talk a little bit about is the influence of Guadalupe on New Mexico. Guadalupe, Our Lady of Guadalupe, is a heavily Mexican devotion to Our Lady, very Catholic, but also mixed with Mexican Native American cultural attributes. And New Mexico is very Guadalupana, devoted to Guadalupe, and her movement, which starts in between the 1530s into the 1600s and really starts to manifest into the 1700s, culminates with this idea of Our Lady of Guadalupe, not only as a representative of Mexican Catholicism, but also as a symbol of Mexican nationalism. Guadalupe becomes a focal point for Mexican identity and will continue through the 1800s and into the 20th century. So let's keep all of these things in mind, the different political and economic movements that are shaping what will become the Mexican nation. And what happens in New Mexico is part of that, because we've said Zebulon Pike comes here showing that the Americans are coming. We'll see what happens within about 40 to 50 years. But first, we have to remember that Mexico is going to become a nation in 1821. Hasta luego. Goodbye.